This is our last reading for the functionalist unit, and it looks at why girls, or why more girls go to college than boys. Remember, people can continue through the education pipeline, and Parsons says that people with low status, low ability tend not to go to college, and people with high status and high ability tend to go to college. And then that those with a mixed status experience cross pressures that could push them either into or out of college, with the low status people being less likely to actually pursue college. But when Parsons was writing, he was writing in the 1950s, and that was during a period of time when women didn't have the same rights as men. That's kind of ironic because we definitely are in the state of Texas back to the 1925 times. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Today, at least, we have Title IX with education that guarantees that, regardless of what your gender is, you should be allowed to pursue and take courses, any courses that you want, and participate in activities. Whereas when Parsons was writing, it was completely legal to deny females an opportunity to take advanced math and science classes because the expectation was that women were going to be simply become mothers and wives. And so they didn't necessarily need those advanced courses, but that's not the case now. And in fact, what we actually have is that women are outperforming their male counterparts. In fact, what I'm going to show you next is just a chart that demonstrates not only is that fact true, but it's been true for a really long time. Right. Notice that in 1947, at the beginning of this timeline, males were there were basically twice as many men in college as there were women. And then by the time we get to the late 1970s, early 1980s, the college enrollment numbers were roughly similar. Then if you look at what happens 1980s onward, the number of women in college exceeds men and gets wider, and then the gap remains relatively stable from the late 2000s and onward. But by 2019, this chart says for every 13 women enrolled in college, there's only 10. This table shows how that gender imbalance is inconsistent across the major racial categories. In 1994, notice that for Hispanics, males and females had roughly the same amount of people enrolling in college. For African Americans, men were still more likely to go to college than their female counterparts. For white women, it was only 4% for 4 percentage point advantage. For Asian males, it was for Asians, there was a 1 point advantage for males. And then if you look at the 2012 data, then it's very consistent across all major racial ethnic groups. Women are out enrolling men in terms of entering into college as a percentage of high school completers. Okay, so let's continue. Now, there's a review of the literature that Riegle and Crumb do, just kind of talking about why is it that girls are outperforming boys, and in part it's because of their academic performance and orientation in high school. Typically, girls get higher grades, put more effort, have more engagements that center on school activities. Girls are also they're also hypothesizing that girls tend to be more outward oriented, and so they believe that girls are more likely to be involved with friends and parents and institutional agents, in this case counselors, that would be more beneficial to them and encourage them to actually go on to college. Now, there have been multiple previous studies that looked at some of the differences in males and females as it relates to their educational experiences. And girls are less likely to be placed in remedial courses and dropped out of school. They earn higher grades across subjects. Even with regard to like college prep courses, they actually take those classes at very similar rates or even larger. Even when it comes to classes that in the past have been historically dominated by males in contemporary times, females are just as likely to take those courses. They're more likely to prioritize schoolwork and perform the good student role. What's the good student role? Going to class, getting to class on time, not talking in class, not getting up, raising your hand when wanting to answer a question, doing homework, right? Those kinds of things. They also documented that females are more likely to spend more time reading outside of school. And then when they looked at what boys were more likely to do, the things that boys were more likely to do actually were really quite problematic. They were more likely to come to class without having their materials. And then when they were doing things outside of class, they were less likely to be oriented towards academic activities. And for guys, this lowers the likelihood of them doing well in school, but also, right, doing those things that would prime them to continue. And remember in Parsons' work, he actually says like school extracurricular activities, school-based extracurricular activities create these status markers for students that kind of play into their success later on and they're continuing their education or, leadership roles, that kind of thing, training after school. And so, the things that guys are doing lead them in a path that takes them away from school. The things that females are doing in high school leads them towards a path of being more likely to pursue and be ready for college. Now, the thing is, the book also, the article's also arguing that because girls are more oriented towards building and encouraged to build relationships and think about other people and engage with other people, what that does is it winds up creating advantages for them as it relates to their parents, their teachers, and their school staff, because and peers and friends. Because having those relationships creates opportunities for psychological encouragement, emotional support, especially, if they're experiencing challenges that could take their attention away from school, but they're also more likely to engage in help-seeking behaviors when they're struggling with content areas, which again, increases the chances of them learning. And then when they learn, they see that they can do it. And then that sets up kind of a positive self-fulfilling prophecy to continue with their schooling. And then, there's a typo there. And then the other thing is that all of those things can also help create opportunities for them to get access to relevant information and guidance in the college applications process. Moreover, this other directedness also makes the children aware of their parents' expectations of them, and and especially for minority populations, education is seen as the route to middle-class opportunities. And so by having and cultivating relationships with their parents, they're more likely to know what their parents' expectations are. And again, Parsons' work, we have emotional connections with our family and we want their affirmation and approval. And so we're more likely to do things when we know what it is that they want us to do. Okay, but here's the thing with minority groups, it's a challenge and something that these authors or this authors ultimately explores. And what she notes is that minorities actually tend to have less social or educational capital than non-Hispanic white individuals. And here's a chart that actually demonstrates that to be true. So for example, if you notice the Hispanics, which are color-coded red, 65% of Hispanics ages 25 and older, their highest degree is high school diploma or less. That's 2 out of every 3 people that are 25 and older. Only 10% of them have a bachelor's degree and only 4% of them have a graduate degree. Now, if you compare that to non-Hispanic whites, which are the blue bar, 38% of them, only 38% of them say that the highest degree they completed was a high school diploma or less. I mean, guys, that is, and gals, that is, gosh, more than, or almost not quite twice as much, or what, half as likely. Hispanics are half, like, let me start over again. The percentage, 38% compared to 68%, that's a huge differential. There's almost twice as many Hispanic people whose highest degree is a high school diploma, which means, again, or less, which means limited educational credentials and little awareness of how to navigate the higher education process, applications process, and how to be successful in those spaces. Now, if you look at non-Hispanic whites, for bachelor's degree, 22% of them earned a bachelor's degree and 12% of them have a graduate degree. So think about this. If we sum those two things together, only about 14% of Hispanics, people over the age of 25 have a bachelor's degree or more. That's compared to 34% of non-Hispanic whites. So 14% compared to 34%, that's a huge differential. And that means that, there's way less opportunities for kids. Even if their parents want them to go to college, do they know how to help them get to college? If their parents never did that stuff, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get there. That cross current pressure. I also wanted to show you this because this is another way of thinking about it. These are the dropout rates from 1993 to 2014. And I just particularly wanted you to focus on 1993. Look, for fully 33% of Hispanics between the ages of 18 and 24 were not completing high school. That's a lot. That's 1 out of every 3, compared to only 9% out of non-Hispanic whites. And so again, a much larger, more than 300 times more than whites. Hispanics were not finishing high school in 1993. Now, the authors were interested in what factors predicted going to college for males and females, and they were also interested in looking at it for Hispanics and for whites. And so they used the Texas Higher Education Opportunity Project. It was a survey of high school seniors that was conducted in the spring of 2002. They targeted 97 schools in the state of Texas and surveyed almost 14,000 students during their senior year and then 2 years after. And they were looking at, okay, their characteristics in their senior year. And then ultimately, where did they wind up? Were they not in college, at community college, or were they in four-year universities? And so I'm going to just show you some quick statistics. I'm not going to show you the regressions that they did because that's advanced statistics, but I think you can kind of process what's happening here. So for example, and we're going to do like a comparison here and then a comparison here between males and females for Hispanics and then males and females for whites. And then we're going to do a quick look between the two racial groups. So the A means that there's a significant difference between males and females, statistically significant. Like the differences are not just chance. These are real. And what we see is Hispanic girls are a little bit more likely to go to four-year colleges than Hispanic males. They're 39% of them are enrolled in a 2-year community college compared to only 31% for Hispanic males. And then only 29% of them didn't go to college compared to 40% Hispanics. Now look at these guys over here in the white individuals. 54% female versus 44% male at a 4-year university. There's no A. That means that the difference isn't big enough to say, yeah, this is a real difference. But then look at this, another significant difference, no college, only 14% compared to 25. So men are much more likely, the males were much more likely not to be in school. But even here, it's a much smaller proportion compared to the Hispanics. Then I just wanted to call your attention to this. Look at the percentages that didn't have a high school degree. 28% of their parents didn't have a high school degree for Hispanics, which is very similar to the data that I showed you for the national level. And then if you look at the white individuals, only 2 or 3% didn't have a high school diploma. That's a major differential. And then it continues throughout. The advanced degrees, females were less likely to have advanced degrees compared to their male counterparts. Excuse me. If we look at this slide here, this is where we're getting into. I wanted just to call your attention to a couple of things here. One is just for you to notice how different the economically disadvantaged concentration is in their schools. We're going to talk about this during conflict theory, but I just wanted to just quick note, almost half for Hispanics compared to just about 20% for white. Here, there's no A's. So what that tells you is that there's not a significant difference in the concentration of poverty within each of the racial groups. And they're not doing a cross comparison by races. I'm just drawing your attention to that. Then if you look here, proportion minority, look at this. For Hispanics, they're going to schools where more than 70% of the students at their schools are students of color, compared to only 30% for the white students. So Hispanic students go to schools that are predominantly students of color. White students go to schools that are predominantly white schools. The other thing that you can see here is that when it comes to academic performance, yes, females are outperforming their male counterparts in terms of GPA, taking algebra or chemistry for the Hispanics, and then a much larger percentage are actually taking AP or IB courses. For whites, the only two differences are for grade point average. Again, females outperforming males, and the amount of IB or AP classes taken. Girls are taking more of those challenging classes. If you look at academic orientation in terms of the amount of time they spend on their homework and the importance of good grades, again, females for both groups are more likely to say that they're more likely to have an academic orientation. And then finally, if you look at friend focus, having friends where they do academic things together, again, females for both groups are more likely to have academically oriented friend groups and focus. They're also more likely to engage in conversations with counselors about college, and they're also more likely to report closeness with their parents in terms of knowing the expectations of their parents. Now, I'm just letting you know that the researcher ran these multiple regressions, and they created these 5 models. And all that's important for you to know about that, and this is just for your knowledge so you understand what's going on. Here I talked about each characteristic independently. When they did the models, they put the data, those types of data, in the model, and then they looked at, okay, what's the difference between males and females when we include this information? And so here's some of the important findings as they relate to Hispanics. One, females were more likely to go to 4-year universities or to 2-year universities compared to their male counterparts. The other thing that I want to call your attention to, that higher GPA was associated with a higher likelihood to go to college. More time spent on homework was associated with a greater likelihood to go to college. They tend to have the more academically focused friends, the more likely they were to go to college. But here's like the real kicker that I really want you to focus on. If the student didn't have, if the student, oh, let me backtrack too. This is for both males and females. If the student didn't talk to a counselor about going to college and you matched them on all these other criteria, there was only about a 23% chance of them attending a 4-year university. If they had one meeting with the counselor where they talked about college, their chances of going to a 4-year university jumped to 33%. 2 meetings, it jumped to 45%. 3 meetings or more, it jumped to 57%, right? So when your parents don't have the educational training or familiarity about college, that is a competitive disadvantage. But again, going to school creates opportunity from a functionalist perspective. And there are counselors on campus that are there to help the students. The students, though, need to seek out the counselors and make the time to actually meet with them. And so in this instance, this goes back to Parsons' work. Do you have the commitment in addition to the capacity, right? And if you have the commitment and you show it in terms of going to a counselor, the odds of you going to a 4-year university are so much higher, right? Now, here's another kind of interesting caveat. Having a close relationship with your parent did not significantly increase the likelihood of Hispanic students going to college. Why is that? Again, this probably goes back to the idea that parents don't have cultural capital to help their children either navigate college or to get the resources so that they can go to college. Again, cross pressures are important. Now, when we look at non-Hispanic whites, females were 2.5 times more likely to go to a 4-year college, and 2 times more likely to go to a 2-year college. And here's really a big difference between non-Hispanic white females, non-Hispanic students and Hispanic students. Parent educational level was very important for the students. In fact, having one parent who graduated from a 4-year college increased their odds of going to college 12 times. This is just like what Parsons said in terms of having high status family orients you towards going towards college. And again, it's because having that knowledge about how to navigate the education system is actually super important when it comes to navigating the education system. Higher GPA and coursework increase the likelihood of going to college, more time spent on homework, increase the likelihood of going to college, and having more academically focused friends increase the likelihood of going to college. So again, birds of a feather flock together. Your values matter. And having an academic orientation, again, having the academic orientation. So it's not about like natural intelligence, it's about a commitment to doing the work so that you can go down that track. And again, that points to this idea that our education system is that space where you can cultivate talents that then will allocate you into a desirable position. And so again, these are like quintessentially like functionalist or affirm the functionalist orientation. And when we look at the full models, the disadvantages for Hispanic females disappears for the 4-year university. So again, like, the idea of more girls go to college, well, more girls go to college overall, but when the behaviors are very similar, when it comes to academic orientation, academic, what was it called? Oh shoot, let me tell you. Sorry, I've got the notes right here. Academic performance and academic orientation, and having that social capital with relationships, then the difference between males and females in the Hispanic model disappears. Though females do have a strong advantage to persist in the 2-year college, but for white females, the gender gap persists, but it just lessens, and it lessens most dramatically for the 4-year university. And so we have to ask ourselves why. That question's not answered in the material, but I will offer this to you. It's probably because jobs that have high concentrations of men that are like exclusively male, are nearly exclusively male, tend to pay better even when there's limited education compared to jobs that are concentrated by females. And so it may be for females that they see that academic credential, even with a 2-year university, 2-year credential, can have a substantial increase in the odds of them getting better compensation. And so they choose to go that route to try to increase those wages, perhaps. And so, okay, I'm going to stop there. Remember, as you're reading and listening to these things, pay attention to the tenets of functionalism and the ideas presented in the readings and that I've presented in the lecture, and be prepared to talk about those things for your first exam. Okay, have a good one. Thank you guys for engaging.